Dr. Elliott once said, "You've turned into a relic with a title we can't afford anymore." My hands trembled as Wilson's all-staff email flashed on my computer screen. After giving the notification that was issued to more than 300 hospital staff, members' considerable thought, current financial situation, I've had to make the tough choice to fire a number of administrative jobs. This includes Marissa Shaw's position as Senior Hospital Administrator, which she now holds as we honor her 18 years of service. Northwood Memorial requires new insights to handle the healthcare issues of the modern world. Gina is we are unable to execute critical changes because we are trapped in the past and opposed to innovation. Upon realizing that my name wasn't even spelt, I sat back in my chair in shock. Yes, I had never been Gina to anyone, and the insult was totally incompetent. But so was Dr. Wilson. My name is Marissa Shaw, and I'm 44 years old, and I served as the Senior Hospital Administrator at Portland's Northwood Memorial Hospital until this morning. I had devoted my professional life to this organization in Oregon. Rising from an entry-level role, I'd survived staffing shortages, budget cuts, and 3 significant changes in leadership. But I wasn't prepared for this until I heard a gentle knock on my door. "I'm very sorry, Maria. Was that Vanessa, my assistant?" Her eyes were wide with worry. As Chief Medical Director, I took a big breath and stated, "Awful. He can't just, he can. He has the power to reorganize administration, and when he canceled our previous 3 meetings, I suspected something was up." Dr. Wilson had arrived 6 months prior with lofty goals and a stellar resume, and he talked about improvements and economies, but demonstrated little curiosity about how our hospital really worked. His first action was to stop providing free parking for employees, and his second was to cut back on nursing. "What are you going to do for night shift coverage?" Vanessa's voice asked. I cracked as I glanced around my office at the family's certificates on the wall. Pictures and the stack of binders with the labels safety procedures and infractions. Those binders included 18 years of painstakingly recorded safety, personnel, and policy concerns. Violations, some of which were fixed and many of which weren't. "I'll be all right," I answered. Feeling an unusual serenity descended upon me, and I realized that sometimes being undervalued is a strength. I got up and began removing my personal belongings without touching the binders because I have digital copies of everything. When security showed up to take me away, I was subjected to yet another of Wilson's degrading methods. I grinned, grabbed my personal items, and left with my head in the air. Kept high, I only made one phone call that night, to Dorothy. When I initially started working at Northwood Memorial Winters, a former board member who retired last year served as my mentor and continued to be a close buddy. He did what Dorothy's outraged voice said. I informed her about the email, which could lead to a defamation lawsuit. Perhaps I muttered, "Marissa," as I poured a glass of wine for myself while sitting in my darkened living room. But I don't want to go that way. I told Dorothy about Dr. Wilson's over the past 6 months. He has been methodically tearing down safety procedures, lowering nurse-to-patient ratios on how he had prolonged surgical staff shifts beyond what was deemed safe on pediatric and oncology floors. Schedules for equipment maintenance had been shortened in order to save money. However, the issue is that I kept been astute in presenting each shift as temporary or supported by a trend in the business. I assume you've documented everything, but the board misinterprets the board to see the cost reductions but not the hazards. Dorothy stated that every event, complaint, and near miss wasn't a question. Since I began working at Northwood, I have been creating these files, and 3 hospital directors before Wilson have attempted taking shortcuts, and I've always had proof that it wouldn't work. What I didn't explain to Dorothy was how, in my experience, there was understaffing and missed medication when my mother was a patient at Northwood 20 years ago. Her experience working the night shift had resulted in difficulties that prolonged her hospital stay by weeks. In order to make sure those errors didn't occur, I decided to seek a career in hospital administration. Others, I added gently, I gave up everything for that hospital. I thought I was making a difference when I started a family vacation. Dorothy insisted that you make a difference, and you can still do so. The question is, what do you do? I took another sip of wine in consideration of what you want to happen now. Alternatives, I could find another job and walk away with a severance package, or I could file a wrongful termination lawsuit allowing me to retire earlier than Wilson had planned. Alternatively, I might fight to defend the patients, as I ultimately stated, and the staff members who are being pushed to their boundaries, so I must approach this intelligent Dorothy strategically. Wilson currently has the board's ear, but that could soon change When the correct information became apparent, I looked at my laptop and considered I had been keeping records of safety infractions, staffing issues, and policy for years. Violates specific information that cannot be written up as the grievances of a former. I requested a few days from the employee to arrange my thoughts and my proof. I sat at my dining room table 3 days after my humiliating discharge. Printouts of emails, policy documents, and incident reports were all around me. I had spent hours gathering the strongest proof of safety infractions under Dr. Wilson's later, Jessica Palmer, the night shift charge nurse in the emergency room, texted me when my phone chimed. "You wouldn't believe what transpired last night. Department, 2 nurses called in sick and they weren't replaced. Wilson claims that this is the new normal after a patient with chest problems waited 4 hours to be seen overnight. We must adjust." I included this in my expanding file because it wasn't only anecdotal. Evidence no longer existed since the data revealed a distinct trend. Incident reports had risen 37% since Wilson took potential mistakes that were discovered before they hurt patients were up. Due to a 42% staff turnover rate, my doorbell rang, twice, disturbing me. When I opened it, Vanessa was standing there carrying a takeaway bag. She pushed past me into the kitchen and said, "I assumed you weren't eating well. I also have Vanessa updated me on the turmoil inside the restaurant as she unpacked containers of Thai food. Thomas Barton, a former Chicago colleague, was named Northwood Wilson's replacement today. Experience in healthcare administration, but seems to be a pioneer in healthcare economics," I snorted. Translation: he is adept at reducing expenses without sacrificing quality, just like Vanessa nodded. And next week, nurses will be implementing a new staffing paradigm. They're reducing the hours of support workers to handle additional patients. Has anyone voiced concerns? I asked Catherine in nursing tried Wilson, even though I already knew the answer. Suggested that she look for chances elsewhere if she couldn't manage the task. Catherine. Morris was well respected after serving as Northwood's nursing director for 15 years. Effective and unyielding in terms of patient safety, even if Wilson was pushing her away as well. The situation was worse than I had anticipated. Vanessa inquired, "What's your plan?" Observing my face. You have that expression when you're planning anything. I hesitated, but Vanessa was faithful. However, engaging her might jeopardize her work. So I'm thinking about my alternatives. I stated, Wilson has proof of harmful procedures, but the most straightforward way would be to present it to the board, certain that he is preventing the hospital's finances from collapsing. But what about the healthcare authority? Vanessa proposed that an anonymous report of safety infractions would result in an I had given this some thought, but regulatory investigations proceeded slowly, and Wilson could hide his tracks, but I needed something more urgent, and I may have to examine this from a variety of perspectives. I stated that the regulators certainly, but also the medical personnel who are worried about patients whose care has declined, and perhaps the Vanessa from the media arched an eyebrow and said, "Not yet." But I was getting ready for everything. But I didn't express how furious I was about more than simply losing my employment, but regarding the lack of concern for safety that I had spent my professional life defending. Wilson wasn't merely shoving me out. He was reversing years of patient safety effort. I considered the binders in my office the information I had gathered and decided it was time to take action. A week following my dismissal, I sipped a cup of coffee in a peaceful Cafe Nook 3, blocks from Northwood Memorial. Sitting across from me was Dr. Andrew Bennett, chief of surgery and someone with whom I'd collaborated for more than 10 years. "I shouldn't be meeting with you," he remarked softly, while anxiously looking around. "Wilson made it apparent that keeping in touch with you would be interpreted as undercutting the new course. However, I saw Andrew sigh and run a hand over you. Marissa Wilson is making choices that aren't right, and through his salt and pepper, hair. Tell me what has changed since I left, as he seems to be able to compromise patient care with no one stopping him," I said, taking out a notebook. Andrew went into depth over the following half hour, concerning developments such as double-shift surgical teams, delayed equipment maintenance, and rationed supplies to the extent that employees were carrying their own necessities, the most alarming of which was the new expedited the patient discharge procedure, giving bed availability precedence over making sure patients were prepared to return home. Andrew stated somberly that "We had 3 readmissions last week because patients were discharged too soon, with one being an elderly woman returned to the emergency room after leaving without the necessary medication instructions. Much worse than when she left hours later. Are people documenting these?" Andrew nodded when I inquired, "We're trying, but Wilson's hired administrators who downplay issues or destroy the documents Catherine has been keeping on file. However, she's already treading carefully. I put a USB disk over the I need you to provide Catherine this table, which includes templates for recording hazardous situations in a certain manner. It is capable of withstanding regulatory examination," and Andrew pocketed the disk. "Are you planning, Marissa?" I admitted, "but I'm collecting proof for the healthcare authorities. Require up-to-date documentation that supports the trends I've been observing because you know this could lead to career termination." I steadily met his stare, both yours and mine. "But what about the patients whose—" Because we were too scared. Lives were meant to be safeguarding how many of them would suffer. You're right. It's only that Andrew glanced down at his coffee. "Wilson is threatening financial miracles and has the board tethered to his finger. Usually financial miracles have a price, as I made clear to the patient in this instance. I'll assist Andrew in making a decision, but use caution. Wilson is more connected than you. I believe his brother-in-law has friends at the state and serves on the board of the hospital association, level that I was unaware of, and it made things more difficult if Wilson had supporters in regulatory agencies, so my grievances might be ignored or forgotten." Andrew grabbed my arm as we were leaving, saying, "There's something else you should. Wilson has been telling people that you were fired due to your incompetence, claiming that you fabricated information and mismanaged money. He's basically attributing the hospital's financial issues to staffing reports. I was physically struck by the charge, and in addition to having been forced out and humiliated, but my professional reputation has grown over the past 18. The methodical destruction of years of devoted service. Thanks for telling me." I struggled to maintain my composure as I made my way back to my car, feeling I had never felt such a rush of rage before. And Wilson wasn't just threatening my patients. He was attacking my eventually. The gloves had to be taken off, and when I got to my car, I'd been reluctant to call James Lloyd, but I decided it was time to involve someone. I was contacted by an investigative journalist who had written about medical matters for the Portland Tribune. After declining to speak on an article on hospital administration years ago, I saw his card in my contacts and texted, "I have information about patient safety risks at Northwood. We should talk." Memorial's reaction was quite instantaneous, and I had been anticipating this call, where James Lloyd was likely in his early 30s and younger than I had anticipated. We met in a park outside the hospital, and I expressed my worries to the piercing eyes behind the wire-rimmed glasses. Regarding Northwood under Wilson's direction, according to rumors, James acknowledged recording our chat with my consent, but without anybody there, staffing issues about high turnover rates. On the inside, it's difficult to confirm that I have more than just what I claimed. giving him a packet containing redacted versions of the last 6 months' worth of event reports, which clearly demonstrate a pattern of elevated safety hazards that are directly related to Wilson's policy modifications. James's look became more serious as he turned the pages, which is alarming, but Wilson might claim that these are isolated occurrences or the outcome of the healthcare system as a whole. Challenges, which is why I've also put these together. I took out a second folder with statistical. These results demonstrate that whilst comparable hospitals in our area maintained stable safety measures, Northwoods have drastically decreased since Wilson's arrival, James whispered. You really did. I've been keeping track of your 18 years of corrected homework. Tendencies over several administrations, but the distinction is that prior directors paid attention when Wilson dismissed me despite the facts. So why go public now instead of taking? This question, which I had asked myself several times, was reasonable and addressed straight to the board. Wilson was deliberately appointed by the board to reduce expenses, and they are observing financial gains without fully comprehending the Wilson has persuaded them of my incapacity and bitterness and safety trade-offs. James nodded slowly. So you need demand from the public to act immediately after patients and the community is aware of the situation, and the board must take action regardless of Wilson's connections. James stated that this is a good story. But you should be aware of what your Wilson won't take this lying down. He will undermine your credibility. Motives he's already acting on, which I brought to light, at least in this manner. The truth is stated as James gathers the paperwork, pledging to confirm my statements. On my own, I experienced a sudden wave of uncertainty about whether I was doing appropriately. Was it for my wounded pride or for the sake of patient safety? When James asked me one last question, what's your best-case scenario from this? I instantly knew the answer. Responded that Northwood has gone back to putting safe, high-quality treatment ahead of price. It doesn't matter if I'm a part of that future or not. That night I got, and when Dorothy Wilson called out of the blue, she spoke without introducing herself. He has been phoning each board member separately to inform them that you intend to sue the hospital for wrongful termination. Making up safety issues to support your argument made my stomach turn. That's untrue. I know that he's poisoned, but they don't care. I don't intend to sue. Well before you can even get close to them, which was a surprise to me. Wilson was. More. He's more tactically orientated than I had thought, and he's speeding up his expenses, Dorothy added. It seems as though he knows a storm is approaching and wants to cut plans and implement them all at once rather than gradually. Obtain as many adjustments as he could, which indicated that he thought I was collecting evidence. Perhaps he had been informed that I was meeting with James, or perhaps that Andrew's chat with Catherine had been overheard. Do I have to? Feeling out of my depth, I inquired abruptly, following Dorothy's advice to stay on track. However, ready for things to go ugly since Wilson is the kind of person who has made a living by never giving up or acknowledging errors. I sat in my living room looking at the wall of evidence I had put together after we hung up, carefully constructing my case before going public, but Wilson was quickening his pace, so I texted James to ask how fast he could run the tale because I needed to speed mine up. 3 days later, the headline read, Northwood Memorial was plagued by patient safety concerns. James had worked swiftly to compare Northwood's safety and confirm my statements with other employees at the hospital. The article mentioned measurements with state averages, but it did not cite me as the main source. My phone started ringing almost immediately after I fired administrative workers who had voiced concerns. Catherine, the nursing director, was the first to arrive. This is a crazy house. Wilson allegedly requested an urgent conference for all department heads, and he is enraged and wanting to know who spoke with. Has he responded to any of the safety questions I posed to the media? No, it's all about directing the story and exposing the traitors. He has vowed to fire anyone who is discovered to have Andrew was the next to speak to reporters, and he had a more considered opinion about the medical staff. Someone finally said, what we've all been thinking. that the board is currently in emergency session, while silently applauding. James himself made the most unexpected call. You should immediately switch to Channel 4. When I turned on the TV, I saw Dr. Wilson standing at a podium with hospital officials on either side of him. He spoke to the cameras with a solemn demeanor, saying, "The accusations printed in this morning's Tribune are completely untrue," he declared resolutely. "Northwood Memorial upholds the highest standards for patient care. These made-up worries seem to have originated from a former employee who has been involved in a vengeance against the company after being fired for incompetence." He continued by describing me as an institution that is easily recognizable without using my name. Irate, unwilling to accept required change, and prepared to harm the hospital's name out of resentment. Wilson, our retained attorney, has proceeded to investigate our alternatives with relation to this slanderous. I turned off the TV because he was publicly disparaging me and my heart was pounding. James remarked over the phone, "You've got him running scared because you're questioning my integrity and professionalism." This is only the start. "What will happen next?" I inquired. After the piece, the State Healthcare Authority got in touch with me, which is where things start to get interesting. This was quicker than I had anticipated, and they want to see all the documentation. Normally, regulatory bodies proceeded slowly, but possibly "I have copies of everything ready to go," I informed him. But the public nature of the allegations had forced their hand. "Wilson's legal threats, what about them?" James, standard. Intimidation techniques dismissed the Tribune's solicitors, checked all of the content before it was published to ensure it was accurate and factual. Wilson had connections and resources, but I wasn't so readily convinced. Didn't I know how facts might be misrepresented and how stories could be manipulated because I had been thorough in my documentation? Later that afternoon, I got an anonymous email from a Northwood email that was intended to demonize whistleblowers. Examine the oncology patient readmission statistics over the past 2 months to identify any trends in early discharges. Wilson personally approved new discharge protocols in spite of numerous concerns after problems. This type of precise, reliable information from oncologists was just what potentially support Wilson's case. So I sent it to James, who said he would follow up by evening news vans were. The local union representing healthcare workers has released a statement endorsing the Tribune's probe and demanding that the hospital's safety procedures be thoroughly reviewed. Patient advocacy groups were requesting clarification on what had begun as my personal documentation collection had become a public reckoning. And as I observed the coverage, I felt an odd mixture of dread and vindication. I had wanted to hold Wilson responsible and protect patients. But I hadn't predicted the speed at which events would intensify or the intensity of the attacks. This was no longer just regarding my profession. It was about Northwood Memorial's future and the security of innumerable patients. And in spite of Wilson's nonetheless, I was aware that I had a crucial edge, because the truth was, on my A-week following the publication of the Tribune report, the healthcare authorities declared inspectors from the official inquiry into Northwood Memorial showed up out of the blue, looked over documents, and spoke with during their 3-day tour. Personnel and operations, Wilson were conspicuously absent, replaced by anxious, I observed administrators who found it difficult to respond to direct inquiries regarding staffing ratios and safety procedures. Distance receiving updates from Andrew and Catherine. The investigation itself served as confirmation that my worries were valid. Merited consideration, but I was certain that Wilson wouldn't surrender easily on the 4th day. I was surprised. By a guest named Thomas Crawford, the chair of the hospital board appeared uneasy as they stood outside my door. "Mr. Crawford," I said. He looked over and said, "I didn't expect to see you here. May I come in?" With genuine surprise. I guided him to my living room where my wall of evidence was still on display, while looking over his shoulder as though I was concerned about being noticed. After looking at it for a while, he said, "The board has received the early findings from the Healthcare Authority," he stated solemnly. "They're about serious safety infractions. He halted, and they particularly mentioned possible fines and regulatory measures. I awaited the decisions made under Dr. Wilson's direction since I felt there was. Additionally, we found financial problems, and he kept consulting fees given to businesses associated with Wilson's relatives and dubious equipment purchases from suppliers, where he has interests, something I didn't realize because I had been totally focused on. The board has called an investigation into safety infractions rather than financial irregularities. Crawford stated that Wilson has been placed on administrative leave until a complete investigation during the emergency session scheduled for tomorrow. Review, he gave me a stern look. We want you to come to the meeting to talk about the future stages. I had a lot of goals in mind when I started this process, but reinstatement had never been one of them, and I had thought that no matter how things turned out, my time at Northwood was finished. With Wilson, "Are you requesting that I come back?" I explained Crawford. Agreed. The board acknowledges that we made a significant mistake in our hiring decision, as well as Wilson. We need your understanding of the hospital's operations, so we're letting you get fired, now. The board meeting was contentious, with members, including Crawford, clearly disagreeing on how to move forward. Others remained defensive even after acknowledging the mistakes in judgment regarding Wilson. Wilson himself was not present, implying that the issues had been overstated, defended by a lawyer who made evasive claims on disparities in management philosophy and misconceptions over regulation changes. When I had a chance to speak, I explained not only the safety issues, but also my vision for resolving them and restoring appropriate nurse-to-patient ratios to avoid future compromises, do routine equipment maintenance, and put in place a system of checks and balances. I underlined that these aren't radical recommendations for patient care. Yes, there are expenses associated with the regular procedures that Northwood has successfully followed for years prior to the most recent adjustments. The discussion went on for hours about readmission issues and regulatory sanctions, but at the conclusion of the meeting, the board made a number of decisions, starting with Dr. Wilson's. My employment was terminated with immediate effect, and I was reinstated. As an independent auditor and senior hospital administrator with a broader responsibility for monitoring safety compliance, would examine all policy modifications made throughout the previous 6 months and promptly reverse any that, as the conference came to an end, James Lloyd's narrative struck the Tribune Healthcare Authority's web version attests to safety infractions at Northwood director, deleted the item that described the money irregularities found in addition to the safety issues. As I left the boardroom during the investigation, I experienced a complicated mixture of feelings of relief that my patient's safety will be restored, contentment that professional reputation had been restored, but there was also recognition of the strained bonds and confidence that would require reconstruction. Catherine greeted me in the corridor with a hesitant grin. "Welcome back," she said plainly. "There's a lot of work to do." To which I answered, "Yes." In the weeks that followed, I led her in, saying, "But this time we'll do it right. Following the adoption of systemic improvements at Northwood, we restored necessary staffing numbers and safety procedures, and set up clear channels for the healthcare authorities to report safety issues under Wilson's direction. The final report listed 27 serious infractions that resulted in hefty fines, but more crucially a plan for progress, as Wilson faces professional shame and Portland was left with possible legal problems relating to financial irregularities. I've heard that he accepted a job with a private healthcare firm in a different state, which is a worrying development, but one beyond my control. As I discovered that I was more dedicated than ever I was reminded by Northwood's mission why I had first chosen to pursue a career in healthcare management, for fame or power, but to guarantee that patients received high-quality, safe care. After my early retirement and subsequent comeback, I stood for a year because they deserved it. Introducing a new patient safety program in the hospital lobby while observing the gathered workers, many of whom had jeopardized their careers to speak out against dangerous situations, I felt thanks to my careful record-keeping, we had the ammunition, but their bravery allowed us to win, turned a possible tragedy into a chance for rebirth, demonstrating that sometimes the best form of retaliation isn't discipline, but change.